welcome back to What the Hype, where this week we are getting ready for spooky season by celebrating Tim Burton's 1988 cult classic Beetlejuice. And it's perfect timing because its sequel, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, just hit theaters last week. But before we get started, please make sure you're following us on all the socials at What the Hype Podcast, except Twitter, where we are What the Hype Show. We're releasing full video episodes and bonus pop culture content over on YouTube. So please check us out at youtube.com/at What the Hype Podcast. You can also find all of the above links to our socials by going to whatthehypepodcast.com. I want to introduce today's panel. I'm so happy to be joined by Micah, Eric, and Pam. Thank y'all so much for coming to discuss Beetlejuice with me. And Eric, thank you for coming on theme in costume.
What, this old thing? I had this for many Halloweens ago. It's funny because when it's like October 29th and I don't have a costume, I'm like, I guess I'm going to do Beetlejuice again.
I like that's your version of like girls just throwing on cat ears, which is what I do.
Yes,
That's
these
amazing,
are my cat
actually.
ears. And, I got to get myself a pair of cat ears. But for now, it's just the stripy Beetlejuice.
Oh, you could do the cat ears with the Beetlejuice costume and basically just give yourself some like rips and tears in strategic spots and just call it sexy Beetlejuice.
Fun story, actually, real quick.
I was going to say you could be a cat in Ohio. Either way.
Ooh. That was a different form of entertainment that we all watched last night.
No, I did not. But I have a prop. It's the handbook for the recently deceased. I had this made out of my old college catechism book. So it's like scripture and stuff.
That's incredible.
That's a smart way to do it.
I know.
Yeah.
I defaced the book too because there's like a hidden pocket for my phone because the costume didn't come with pockets. So anyway, I'm prepared. I'm thrilled to talk about this movie.
Your name is even changed, Eric.
That's right. I'm surprised you're calling me Eric. My name is actually, I can't say it, but you have to say it. So,
should we all say it in succession?
Well, as long as you don't say it 3 times, we're fine.
Yes, don't banish me, please. I'll be good, I promise.
All right. Well, we're keeping an eye on you. So to get into the 411 on Beetlejuice, of course, I'm assuming if you're listening to this episode, you've either seen the original movie, you've seen the original and the sequel that's in theaters now, or you've never seen it at all and you're just trying to understand what it's about. This episode is for any and all of the above combinations of people who want to hear a little more about Beetlejuice. We'll talk a little bit about the story, the background, and what's made it into such a cult classic that it is, that resulted in a sequel coming 36 years later, which is really cool. But to give a little bit of 411 here, and I pulled this from Nerdist because, like Beetlejuice, I love being able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So I appreciate this summary from them. So they say in the early 80s, horror novelist Michael McDowell saw the success of movies like Poltergeist and Ghostbusters. Both of these films brought supernatural themes to mainstream audiences with a lighter touch and became huge successes. This inspired McDowell to try his hand at writing a story in the spooky realm with a similar approach. At this time, according to The Ringer, McDowell and his partner were living in Medford, Massachusetts, when the yuppie explosion began. Annoyed at the pretentious new neighbors in their quaint town, McDowell came up with the idea of nice ghosts who need to get rid of awful modern living folks in their home. The nice ghosts call upon the services of a mischievous bioexorcist who goes by the name of Beetlejuice. I felt like that was a very solid summary of that story.
I was like, wow. Really good context. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. So, panel, we've all seen the original Beetlejuice before. That's why we're all here, right? Did y'all see it when you were kids?
Definitely. I can recall watching. It was one of the ones that I had on rotation. Pretty much along with Ghostbusters, Back to the Future Part 2.
I never would have guessed that, Eric.
I know. But, it's funny because as a kid, some of the jokes and things go way over your head.
actually saying that about Ghostbusters too, when
It's
we
true.
did that episode. Yeah, there are jokes that get made that as a child you would never, ever pick up on. And now you watch back, you're like, oh.
A lot of innuendo, stuff like that.
Of
But yeah,
course.
I've probably seen the first movie 24 times at least.
The 80s allowed for way more innuendo and uncomfortable moments than probably would be allowed today.
And it was probably rated PG, isn't it? I haven't tracked it.
Yeah.
I mean, but like the MPAA standard was like insane in the 80s.
I mean, Beetlejuice says the F word.
I think you could actually say it once.
Yeah,
in the
isn't
80s
that
for
still
PG.
the case?
Oh my God, it
for
is PG.
PG-13. I knew it.
No,
I knew
it's
it.
PG. Yeah,
Yeah.
PG-13
He's over
wasn't
there
even
like
made until...
crotch grabbing and going to brothels and like
Right.
it's PG parental guidance only.
Totally.
Yeah. Do you know what's funny about like Beetlejuice for me and also my brother, because we kind of grew up with like, you know, the same pop cultures. I can't remember if we ended up watching the movie because we took a trip to Universal Studios Hollywood. I was from California, and they used to have this Beetlejuice Graveyard Bash, and it was like a music show, and it was there in the 90s. I think it was also in Florida too. I don't know how long it ran for. I don't know if like that was the catalyst for like my mom finally being like, oh yeah, I have the VHS. We can like finally watch that because I guess you guys are old enough. Or it was because they had the cartoon Beetlejuice on TV and like we didn't know that. So it's like one of those predates us watching the movie or my watching the movie for the first time. And I can't remember which one, but I think I must have been about maybe like 8 or 9 the first time I watched it and just like watched it every year since then. On Halloween.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the cartoon series because that was definitely on TV when I was like watching cartoons and TV. So I can remember seeing a bunch of episodes. Can't really remember too much about them, but pretty much every episode had Beetlejuice and Lydia traveling like more.
Yeah, and they were besties. They were best friends, and it was like so crazy.
It wasn't the creepy antagonist nature that's kind of in the film.
No, well, and they also kind of left out the whole part of Beetlejuice trying to force Lydia to marry him.
Right. A child
like,
bride.
Harmless stuff. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
They definitely, I remember that show, and I think most cartoons in the 90s played a little fast and loose with the humor. There was a lot more humor that was intended for the adult audiences, and I really feel like I remember the Beetlejuice cartoon being similar. I remember specifically one time, and it's because my mom, I'll never forget, she was in the room with me and she rolled her eyes so hard at this and heaved like a sigh about it. But there was one time where Beetlejuice and Lydia had to, for some reason, shrink down and like go inside of someone else's body, like Magic School Bus style, big Miss Frizzle energy. And at one point, they were in this like dark environment and it was just storming and thundering. And Beetlejuice was like, oh, these must be the thunder thighs. And I really like as a kid, I didn't understand what that meant. All I know is that my mom saw that and she was like, oh, like major eye rolls. So I think they definitely adopted some of the energy from the original movie into that cartoon for sure. But it makes sense that it would stick out for us because we're all 90s kiddos.
It feels like today Beetlejuice would probably be on Adult Swim or something of that nature versus probably being on normal cable television, right? Or probably, I don't remember what station it was on way back, but it probably was available in most households.
I love that we're getting this time to be nostalgic about the role that Beetlejuice played in our lives as kids. There is someone like notably absent from the panel tonight, and I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I do
Eric's
have to
not
ask.
Here.
No,
we're joined by Beetlejuice.
Yes.
Beetlejuice.
Oh, no.
Please, no more.
Andrew's not here. And I have to wonder, is this another classic that Andrew has not yet seen? I think it's pretty well established that there's some pretty big titles that he has missed out on. Pam.
Oh my God.
I think you've been keeping a catalog.
The only one that I take like so much offense with is The Wizard of Oz, only because that's my favorite movie from childhood. And I'm shocked that he's never seen that movie, because it's just one of those things that you would think they would at least popped on in school at some point. That is like shocking to me.
I genuinely don't know how you missed that.
Yeah, so I won't be surprised if he hasn't seen Beetlejuice either. I know there's a bunch of others that that he hasn't seen, and this comes up a lot.
Surefire way to ensure that he's not on a show is to pick a classic movie for us to review on What the Hype.
I gotta think one of these days he's gonna just be lonely if we keep doing this, and he's gonna consent to watch something. It's gonna be good.
It's good peer pressure.
Anyway.
Yeah,
no.
I mean, that's what we're all about here at what the Hype. We've all known each other so long that like the lines between friendship and peer pressure have really blended for sure. But before we get into some more specifics about what it is about this movie that has stuck with us for so long, I also wanted to observe something funny. I think this is true for a couple of us. Eric, you're a 1988 baby, right?
Yeah, I'm curious about this note.
Yeah, so Beetlejuice did come out in 1988. That is the year that both you and I were born. Is that a coincidence? I mean, I'm super into, all things horror and campy horror. Eric is literally in character right now. Just feels like it was meant to be.
Yeah. I see what you're saying now. I something about that year for sure. The year of the dragon always sounded so cool.
Ooh, it was the year of the dragon.
Yeah.
I was 6 at the time this movie came out.
Tremendous.
Did you see it in theaters, Micah?
I don't remember, so I will say that I did not see it in theaters.
We've already established I didn't see it in theaters either, but I will say that I like that you refer to this as campy horror, because I don't really like horror movies, and I think like campy is like my gateway into this genre, and it's very much just like dipping a toe in.
Yeah, and so. I don't know that I'd categorize. I mean, horror is the genre where you're like, if you have to choose one, maybe, but it is there's like a lot of satire to it, which I understand. Yeah. A lot of horror is like self-referential and a reflection of our time, sure, but it just seems like an adult comedy that with a side order of it, the subject matter being about death and what happens.
It's like it's macabre, right? Dark humor.
Yeah, it's we'll talk more about that later, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's also a setting or like a premise that I think most people can relate to, right? Because at some point or another, we've all had a bad neighbor, or like maybe a bad roommate, maybe someone who we just lived near for whatever reason that drove us crazy.
This is like Uncle Buck if Uncle Buck were dead and still
That's
haunting
amazing.
You. Yeah, I know. For a minute there, Laura, I thought you said we can all relate to this because we've all died. It's just like, and been stuck in like a purgatorial realm before being brought back to life by a bioexorcist. Yeah. No, it's cool.
Let's talk about the things that really stick with us about this movie. The first thing that always jumps out at me is the soundtrack.
Yeah. If we want to feel sort of old, as well as talking about the animated series, they used to sell these CDs in stores around Halloween time that had like Halloween music, and a lot of it was almost like sound effects. It was, things like Boris Karloff and all this stuff. The Monster Mash was on it, but without fail, the Beetlejuice theme would always make its way onto these soundtracks. It's something so sinister, and yet so like the camp and the bombast and the banging and clanging of it is just iconic.
Yeah, Danny Elfman really went off on this one, and I think that I remember reading or hearing an interview with him where he said that it almost kind of felt like there was no pressure because this was only the second movie that Tim Burton had done, and this was only the second movie he had scored with him. Prior to that, they had both worked on Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and obviously that score is iconic in a different way. Another cult classic movie, right? But Beetlejuice is so different from that, and I think that you can kind of really see how like their creative weird sort of matches one another. in a strange sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you wouldn't necessarily see the two aesthetics and like put them together, but they work really well.
Another thing I'll call out, because we're talking about the score, there are definitely other I want to say there's a soundtrack and a score. Obviously, the other composed pieces are also very good, very memorable, very iconic, haven't really been redone. But Danny Elfman was part of one of my favorite bands, Oingo Boingo. And they actually were themed almost entirely around the dead. There's they do the song Dead Man's Party, which made it into some other films. They do the theme to Weird Science. It's a couple of other like very niche, almost like sinister camp bandstand music. And it was crazy to realize, I think, during the early internet years, that Danny Elfman, also, famous movie composer at that point, had this stint with this band doing songs that I knew.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
You got to listen to Oingo Boingo. Their album Boingo Alive is no skips for me. It's insane. There's 40 songs. But the other thing I wanted to mention as far as the movie soundtrack is that the Calypso music, a lot of Harry Belafonte, is really seamlessly interwoven into the movie. The movie itself feels like a musical journey. It's not a musical, although they did eventually make Beetlejuice a musical, but there's just music is everywhere in this film.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting contrast between, Danny Elfman's score and then all of the Harry Belafonte, but it's somehow complementary. It gives like happy scary or happy sad type vibes. Like if we're thinking about, if we want to talk about Inside Out, for example, and how you can have emotions kind of melt together and have two in one, that's kind of what it feels like.
Love that reference.
Yeah, maybe why it feels charming to me in that way.
And I think it works really well that all of that Belafonte is kind of, I didn't realize it until watching the movie back for the purposes of this show, that it almost kind of serves as like the theme music to the Milfords, right? That's their last name, right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The Maitlands, right?
Yeah.
The Maitlands. It serves as like a theme. It serves as theme music for the Maitlands. And I think that works really well, especially considering like how the two sounds clash, right? Because it is two worlds colliding when they die. And so I think as like symbolism and theme for like one world entering another and vice versa, it makes sense that you would have these two different sounds that end up blending together but don't quite work until they shouldn't get their
work
footing
together.
Yeah.
On this most recent rewatch, I also realized what you're saying, Pam, is that like Adam was playing a Belafonte record at the beginning of the film. Like that's the music that character likes. So to then, and when they choose to haunt the Dietzes at dinner with the famous Day-O Banana Boat song, that's them choosing to do it and not Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is not haunting them at that moment. And so it's all what Adam and Barbara, like what music defines them, their happiness, exactly what you're just saying. And I love that. I think the best films will take, maybe even an iconic track that people know, but use it either ironically, Tarantino does that a lot, or do exactly this, which is deliberately pick something that should clash and make it not clash. It's great.
Yeah, like what is it? Like Clockwork Orange utilizes "Singing in the Rain" in a very similar way,
which was
sinister
improvised
way.
in the moment by Malcolm McDowell.
Similar,
another great reference.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, before we talk a little bit more about like the Tim Burton aesthetic, the narrative, and of course we have to talk about Michael Keaton, I wanted to ask everyone here, anyone, tell me who was the most annoying neighbor that you ever had? Tell me a little bit about them. You can give them a fake name.
Ooh.
Well, if I talk loud enough, they might be able to hear me.
Oh no, they still live next door. The call is coming from just next to inside the house.
Are you talking about the crickets, Micah?
You got it. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Well, we did step away for a moment to go get a bioexorcism for the crickets that are serving as Micah's neighbor for this example. So While we do that, check out a few words from these sponsors. And we're back. So everyone here, I think particularly Eric and Pam, you had kind of zeroed in on the Tim Burton aesthetic and the significance that had. And I think that's a really important takeaway here, because this movie is really what cemented the Tim Burton aesthetic. Anything weird and quirky that we've ever gotten out of Tim Burton since the late 1980s, I think is thanks in large part to this movie and its success. Because really, if you think about the artistic style in everything that Tim Burton does, it really has its roots here.
Definitely the late 80s, early 90s were where Burton cut his teeth. From Beetlejuice to Batman to Edward Scissorhands. Between those three films alone, you've got a director who, just completely for the next 30 years would continue on making those similar types of films.
Mm-hmm. And I was really trying to think of adjectives to describe his work, and I came up with, he's both imaginative but unconventional, and I think that really comes through in a movie like this, because very few people can kind of combine gothic and whimsical. And you mentioned too, Eric, Edward Scissorhands. Like, I think that's 100%
that. Yeah,
another perfect example of that. But I think that's why it can pull so many different types of viewers in, because you're not just expecting it to be this dark, Pam, you used the word macabre film earlier. It's not that. It has like this kind of fun, airy nature to it too. And one of the things I think about when we think about kind of the gothic and the whimsical is the afterlife waiting room. Like, just coming up with that concept in and of itself is just something that, it's smart.
Yeah, it demystifies, I think, what...
That's a great word, yeah.
Yeah, something that we would all... Well, it demystifies mysticism. All the things that we would think of in the afterlife or one day may face... will face, if there is an afterlife, it's answered in sort of this playful and self-referential manner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that it's like very much like, like, I don't know if you all have ever been to like an immigration office with somebody, but it's very similar to that. It's like, that's so clever. Of course it would feel that way, because they're literally migrating from one world to the next. But all it is waiting and taking a number and waiting for them to get to your case.
Yeah. And if it's a long number, well, what else have you got to wait for?
Yeah,
You've got time.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. You've got nothing but time.
Right.
I mean, you see people pulling like number 11,700,032 or crazy like that. So yeah, it's definitely a commentary on the bureaucracy.
It reminded me a bit of the DMV. I'm not sure if that was the initial inspiration, but it gave me DMV vibes.
Yeah.
Well, the benefit of using that too, apart from it being funny, is it does allow this film to set ground rules or like internal consistency around what they can and can't do. There's almost no limit to what Beetlejuice's powers are. But he still seeks marriage for its contractual benefits. And the saying his name 3 times is a rule that someone imposed. And so there's these things that kind of give the movie structure, I think. And it's all to do with what you can and can't, like when the Dietzes or when the Maitlands are first trying to haunt the Dietzes and they're failing miserably at it. There's, the movie has fun playing with, they can't be seen, but they can wear sheets, which can be seen, and they can't necessarily be heard unless it's by somebody like by their daughter. So you kind of get to know this world. And even though there's this like boring red tape bureaucracy behind it, there's also infinite potential.
Yeah. You know what I love that you brought up there as well, Eric, the whole rule about needing to say Beetlejuice's name 3 times for him to appear or for him to be banished. what I love about that is it's like such a cultural touchstone, I think, for a lot of people, that the rule didn't need any explaining, because growing up as kids, how many of us played Bloody Mary
I was just
where it was
thinking
the
about
same
that.
rules?
I'm still afraid to say it into like a camera, so you won't catch me saying it. But yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I love that they picked, actual living, breathing myths and sort of urban legend to inform the rules, and the way they built the universe, I think, is really cool. But we can't not talk about Beetlejuice himself. Michael Keaton, I think, is a significant part of the reason that this movie was such a classic. And what I think is so inspiring about that is that Michael Keaton had actually come off of a short series of flops of other films that he'd done. And then he came into this movie and just, acted the shit out of this role. But he did it by having fun and being like, you know what, I'm going to do whatever weird, quirky stuff it is that I want to do with this character. And that's what makes the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, Beetlejuice is such a unique character in the overall film compendium, like the mythos of everything that's been filmed, everything that's been produced from Hollywood. There's nobody quite like Beetlejuice, and this came out in an era where you could make a film about just like a weird dead dude and have it be a hit. And so all of the ingredients had to be, I think, exactly right. And they were. And I think part of it is that intuition, particularly for Keaton to lean in on whatever he was feeling, and for Burton to kind of realize that you can frame the movie around an actor's performance in this way, which is not new. But the idea that the subject matter, and, this comedy guy who's like, hey, how's it going? You're like, oh God, who is this guy? And by the end of the movie, you still don't know much about him, but you've been thoroughly entertained.
Yeah,
well,
but
you know what's
like
crazy?
Him.
Yeah, and you know what's crazy about that is I was reading this I think it was like a feature in Variety or something. There's so much out there about like Beetlejuice lore right now because of the sequel that just came out in theaters. But Michael Keaton only has like 17 minutes of screen time in the original movie, which is insane that he makes such a huge impression in such a short amount of time. But that, to Eric's point, that is a testament to the character Michael Keaton was able to create. And it is kind of like really brave that he decided to go with that. I know he had a lot of input in terms of like, even like the way that we see his hair, for example, in the like design of the costuming and makeup. But like Keaton was not like Michael Keaton as we know him today when he took on this role, right? So in a way, it was like pretty ballsy of him to be like, I'm going to play this crazy dead guy, to your point, and just like go insane with it and just like leave it all out there on the floor, because like that could have made or break. It could have been a make or break moment for him in a bad way,
And then becomes Batman. I mean, that's
exactly
right.
Yeah.
Well, when I think of Michael Keaton's acting, the quintessential moment is where he's staring down Jack Nicholson and he's having this low level conversation. He goes, "You want to get nuts?" And he smashes, he whips out the fireplace poker or something. And it's just like so crazy that this guy is also Bruce Wayne billionaire that's doing this now. And all of a sudden he turns on a dime like that. That era, or that aura of unpredictability in a performance is, I think, the capstone of that is like Beetlejuice, where he just gets
so you think that was a Beetlejuice inspired moment for him in Batman?
It's just the part in which Keaton shows through. I think we're getting something from his id, and there's other zany Keaton films. Multiplicity is one that comes to mind. He plays several versions of him, like clones of himself, I think. And it's just very, very, very fun to see that he was able to do that. There's a lot to love about Beetlejuice that isn't Beetlejuice himself, which also deserves being talked about. But the movie would not be him, or the movie would not be the movie without him. We talked about this with Ghostbusters. The Bill Murray character, Pete Venkman, utter creep. The movie would absolutely not work both
without him.
Both in 1984 and in 2024, but it has him, and weirdly, it makes you forget how creepy he is. And the movie's a classic in large part because of that specific performance. He's the most quotable character. He's the, he's the one that the audience watches almost in spite of the creepiness or because of it. It's really odd.
And there's a great deleted scene with Sigourney Weaver, or I guess it's like the end of the credits scene with the flashcards, because that was a big part of his kind of creeper nature in the original movie where, he was, but we don't have to get into that. I did just want to say quickly about Michael Keaton, with Beetlejuice, he's really not a typical protagonist or a typical antagonist. He's just kind of this chaotic force that exists throughout the course of the film. And he's really there just to kind of disrupt the story in ways that you wouldn't expect. And I think that's what is so cool about it. Like, that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, he's like an element.
Yeah. Like, well, he's a metaphor for the unpredictability of life in face of the certainty of death. I love the way that you put that, Micah, as far as antagonists and protagonists, because the protagonists are the Maitlands and or Lydia, and the antagonists are the Dietzes and Otho, who try to exorcise them out of their house after they try to haunt them. Beetlejuice is just there. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like we also have to mention Lydia, portrayed by Winona Ryder at the time. She was new to the scene, but she also became kind of like a Tim Burton horror film icon of the 80s and 90s. We, of course, see her in things like Edward Scissorhands as well, for example. And this role, it was so funny rewatching this and seeing how well she kind of struck the performance between like being a goth kid, but also being a goth kid who didn't take herself too seriously.
But also just was like a moody teenager, which you can't relate to that.
Right.
Like that whole scene where she's like writing the letter and she's like, I'm alone. And then she's like, no, wait, I am utterly alone. It's like,
yeah. No, Winona Ryder was having a great couple of years. Heather's came out the same year as Beetlejuice. Right. Totally. But I think it comes back to Burton's attention to characters. You love the Maitlands. You care for Adam and Barbara. You care for Lydia and her situation. And you love, I think, the Dietzes, despite their supposed to be intolerable personalities, because the movie spends time with them. The movie has a compassion for these characters, and that comes from Burton.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into the inspirations for this film and really use it as a jumping off point to talk about what it is that makes the movie unique and what holds our interest all these years later. So I thought we could do a little name origins. Micah, I hope that I do you proud, because I know you normally do name origins for us on MuggleCast. But Beetlejuice, which is correctly spelled Betelgeuse, is the second brightest star in the constellation Orion and is part of the mythology of many cultures. But kind of for a broad bit of background here, the red star, like the planet Mars that derives its name from a Roman war god, has been closely associated with the martial archetype of conquest for millennia, and by extension, the motif of death and rebirth. Super fitting. But of course, I think in particular, American English speakers might struggle when first presented with the word Beetlejuice, with how exactly to pronounce it. So, of course, it gets the version of it we see in the film, which is like a beetle and then juice, which is how Beetlejuice teaches Lydia to say his name.
Right.
It's what you get if you smash Rita Skeeter.
Oh man, we're connecting the threads all over the place. But something that I thought was really interesting about like the etymology of the naming of Beetlejuice is often mistranslated as armpit of the central one. And this was apparently due to European mistransliteration into medieval Latin from the original Arabic name, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. But the upshot is they mistranslated a Y into a B, and doing that from Arabic to Latin changed the word into armpit instead of like shoulder or arm. So I think the thinking is that in the original translation, this was intended to be like the arm of Orion, like the shoulder of Orion. People read it differently in different cultures, but I don't think the original intent was armpit. But the fact that this was literally something, in our real world that was mistranslated, that then became the name for this like totally kooky dead guy.
That's fantastic. And you can see him doing like the thing where you take your armpit and use it to make fart sounds. Yeah. Like it's not in the movie, but I assume it's in there somewhere.
I mean, he definitely squeezes his nuts and it makes like a honking sound. So
there you go.
It's there. And that's the thing. There's like enough slapstick humor in this for like kids and families, I think, to keep them entertained. But there's also enough of an undercurrent of like, yeah, we're going to be a little edgy here.
I think it's the chaos for sure.
Well, that might answer why we're still talking about this movie 36 years later and why it's gotten a sequel. But Eric, did you have other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's just nothing like it. There's plenty of movies, especially now and over the last 40 years, about the afterlife. There's plenty of movies that, explore topics in an interesting way. But this movie, by being about a character, and even though there is a sequel, which is good, by the way, I've just seen it. Even though there is a sequel, I think what made it sort of cult status and iconic is the fact that there wasn't a sequel for 40 years. And for many, many years, it's this standalone movie. It didn't spark a series. There was a cartoon, but there wasn't this multiverse associated with Beetlejuice. It was just one and done from the 80s. It's like, oh, do you know this old movie from the 80s that nobody else ever heard of? And it's like, yeah, everybody's heard of that. It just, for me, the singularness with it, which is just totally... they didn't do anything with it for a long time. The movie itself is rich, though. It could have spawned 5 sequels, a lot sooner.
Yeah. So do you think that that's ultimately what made this movie successful, whereas other franchises maybe petered out because they were a little oversaturated?
I think that's true. I mean, I think that ultimately the films, as with TV shows, should never overstay their welcome. And I think it's like, Back to the Future is a trilogy, but it works. It's set in that moment, and they knew that they were never going to make a 4th one. With Beetlejuice, it's like, here's this quirky film, may or may not be a huge success, because you don't know before, when you're making the film. But after that, everyone just got to go on with their careers and do other stuff that wasn't at all related to this. And it felt satisfying knowing that it was so unique. I think that the success of Beetlejuice has largely been that nothing else has come close, even being related in subject matter. Nothing has come close to touching some of the same exact beats as Beetlejuice.
I mean, I looked at some reviews of the movies way back in the day, and this one really kind of captured the essence of the movie, I thought, because it said that the film combined elements of dark comedy, fantasy, and horror in a way that's rarely seen at that time, obviously. Its playful yet macabre tone creates a distinctive atmosphere that balances laughs with eerie moments. What else does that? Like, to your point, Eric, it's really in a unique space of its own. The other piece of it too is just the fact that it did depict the afterlife as this bureaucratic, surreal environment with its own set of rules that were completely absurd. Like we were talking about the waiting room earlier. Eric, you have the handbook for the recently deceased right there, I believe, next to you.
Yep. And things from it. Draw a door. What? And it works.
Yeah. Don't forget the doorknob, though.
Don't
forget
you
got
the
to
doorknob.
knock.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, the only other thing that I've ever seen like it was a show called Dead Like Me that only ran for 2 seasons.
Show.
And that show was so
good.
good. Like they managed to strike, I think, similar chords without just regurgitating their own version of Beetlejuice. That's a really fun one. It's basically about dying and becoming a Grim Reaper. So even though it only got 2 seasons and a movie, it is definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. And then I would say, like, I think for me, like Addams Family Values is kind of like totally similar. I think because it doesn't take itself too seriously.
Right.
Not necessarily just because they're also like a full goth family, but that also, I think that's like the only other thing I can think of that really strikes this balance between like being a bit eerie and a bit creepy, but also being really fun and kind of lighthearted in a very dark and twisted sort of way.
Speaking of dark and twisted, Micah, we're going to take a few beats here and give you a chance to go check on your cricket situation and see if they have been bioexorcised out of your yard. So we'll be back in just a few moments. And we're back. Micah, what's the verdict? What's going on with the crickets? Damn it. Well, did we say Beetlejuice's name 3 times? Have we done that sequentially this episode? That might be where we fucked up.
We have to banish them. Crickets, crickets, crickets.
Yeah.
And like that, they're gone.
I think I might need to get some spiders. They eat crickets.
Ooh.
There you
I actually
go.
have some. We had a spider, like a cellar spider type, that just had 50 babies in our bathroom.
Oh, great.
Okay.
That is, it's very on brand with the suit, Eric, I gotta say.
They're so tiny. They're like the tiniest little babies.
Oh, I don't know how I feel about that.
So they need to be fed,
I don't know how I
saying.
feel about it. It was Meg's passion project.
Oh, no.
I'm going to have to chat more with you about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
But let's chat about what are our favorite moments quickly from the original Beetlejuice.
Something we haven't talked about yet is the model.
Yeah.
So Adam's model, and it gets a lot of screen time in the film because it's where Beetlejuice has chosen to sort of hide out in the Maitland's attic, later the Dietz's attic. Everything about it is delightful. I love when Adam and Barbara go into the model and they have to dig, and what they're digging up is like the little squares of like turf that you put down, like the plastic or rubber grass and everything like that. Like there's a toy aspect which I think works extremely well alongside the theme of differing reality. And there is something about, a photorealistic or an accurate model. The film opens with this overhead view that could be the real world, but then you find out it's a model version of the real world. It's like picture in picture or universe in universe. It works on hundreds of levels with the theme, that to have this art, intricate model of the world lets us reflect on what the real world and this fake world or miniaturized world all are. So
it's not
I think it works really well.
Direct comparison, but it reminds me a bit of Men in Black at the end of the movie, where like the earth goes into the marble, which goes into a bunch of other marbles, and then they're like the locker and everything. Like, I'm not remembering it exactly right.
Yeah, the aliens are like playing marbles,
right?
It's like
and it's all contained within something much larger. Like, we haven't even talked about sandworms and what the hell that is.
Yeah, and they really have, and you can see Saturn from that like planet. I don't know if it's Neptune or Pluto or what it's supposed to be, but yeah.
One of my favorite moments was when his face kind of morphs and distorts this grotesque way that's kind of both eerie and amusing at the same time. And I think probably we don't appreciate the special effects of that as much as we should. We talked a lot about that too when we were doing Ghostbusters. Like for the 1980s, like these effects are actually pretty good.
Well, crucially, now unlike John Carpenter's The Thing, this film doesn't show the worst part. It allows the audience to guess. The camera cuts to the behind Beetlejuice shot for the things that are coming out of his face. You don't see it. You can only guess, but based on the character's reaction to it, you assume it's also horrible. But it's almost as much about what they don't show as it is about what they do.
Well, it's also so cartoonish.
Yeah.
In the way that it's executed, right? Like the stuff happens and things are kind of like his eyes are popping out and they're kind of shaking all over the place. And you hear these like zany, like boing sounds in the background. Like, so it's like simultaneously horrifying but hilarious. And that's why it works.
It actually reminds me of The Mask.
Yeah.
When Jim Carrey puts the mask on.
Yes.
Yeah. Man, more 90s nostalgia. But it's crazy because movies like this that have left such a cultural mark on all of us really end up having a lot of influence in the movies that, we saw come out at least in the decade after them, right? Like,
and I was just going to say too, we haven't talked about like the stop motion claymation a lot, but it feeds into what you were talking about as well. I feel like that was such an innovative choice to make at the time, because even though it's not the most sophisticated way to animate something, but it is like a labor of love because you have to move things a millimeter at a time to just get one scene right. Despite how many years have passed, it still looks so charming on screen. Yeah. And it adds to the whimsical element that we keep coming back to as well.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of Nightmare Before Christmas, which was all stop motion too. It's like years before his progenitor, like the origins and the DNA of it is shared. But yeah, it also just gives us this otherworldly feel because it's almost uncanny valley. There's something not quite right about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just about the way they move. Like I think about like when Delia's sculptures come to life too.
Yeah,
the way that they move is so like unnatural, but it works because it's not natural for them to be moving at all.
Right.
And like we haven't talked a lot about the Dietzes, but Catherine O'Hara just like steals every scene she's in because she's so insane and outlandish. And like some of my favorite scenes are the ones where she's just playing this crazy, like tortured artist,
Yeah, this is my art. It's dangerous.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I love how all of her art, I mean, again, it's basically just Tim Burton aesthetic. And I love the commentary about, yuppies coming into these communities that don't want them there and bringing their shitty art with them. And I think there's a commentary there, Pam, you mentioned about the way they move looking unnatural because it is unnatural, but it's also probably a commentary on how the Dietzes don't really belong in this community. And that's why the Maitlands are trying to get them out of their house. But of course, in the end, they find a way to coexist.
Yeah.
So, spoiler alert for anyone who didn't know that, you're 36 years too late.
Sorry, Andrew.
You won't remember. And I say that with love.
He's not going to listen.
He says that about himself. He's like, don't worry about it. I won't remember. Sorry, Andrew. It was too easy. It was low hanging fruit. You weren't here. So we had to kind of to bring us home. I wanted for us to talk about, for anyone who has seen Beetlejuice since it came out last week, I wanted to see if we could give a quick spoiler-free recap review of the sequel. Do we feel like it holds up?
Who's seen it?
Me.
Yay! Pam, you have too?
Yeah.
I'm the lone wolf.
Okay.
Oh, Micah, you're putting yourself on the chopping block to become the next Andrew.
I would consider the sequel, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, as the story continues for Lydia Dietz, as she is now grown with a daughter of her own, and due to circumstances, finds herself in the town of Winter River, Connecticut, again, and also reunited with everyone's favorite supernatural spookster, Beetlejuice. Some of the characters from the first film are there. You learn what happened in the interim, and you even get more insight into Beetlejuice's own history. There are a lot of laughs, there are a lot of clever moments, and a lot of fresh new characters that you wouldn't have expected. Everything that you come to expect or want out of a sequel in terms of more backstory and wider world building is all there in 100 minutes. And I really enjoyed it.
I liked how they built on this like minuscule detail from the original and really kind of extrapolated that.
I can't quite put my finger on what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure you can't. But anyway, I just love that. I think that like, I think they know that like I think they knew what people were kind of wanting to see, which was more of this afterlife, afterworld. So they kind of, tick that box as well. We're plunged back into this world and we get more of it, which is great.
Including more Keaton.
Yeah, more Keaton. I'll
Keaton
have to look. I wonder how much
screen time he got
screen
this time.
Me too.
Right. Well, more. But yeah, Keaton in this role, honestly, I'm happy to report Micah and others hasn't missed a beat.
Yeah. I agree. He was, it was like no time had passed at all.
Yeah.
And
truly,
I just had such a good time in this movie. And I will say, I just really appreciated that this movie did, it told its own story in the continuation of the larger story. But what I liked about it was it didn't just fall back on every gag from the original movie. There is a lot of originality to this movie and this story, and it's just a fun ride. So if you loved the original, I think you'll love the sequel.
And try and get out to the theater to see it if you can. The movie going experience was so much fun. It's really fun whenever you go to see movies like this to see like multiple generations coming in together sometimes to like, have a nice time at the movies. I just think that is so much fun. I love looking around and seeing like parents that grew up with it bringing their kids or like, like grandparents coming along because they remember when it came out too. So it's great.
Well, to really bring us home here and wrap up today's discussion, do we think that a third entry entitled Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice is inevitable?
Bye, Eric.
Oh no.
They left. Eric left.
Come back.
Banished back
Beetlejuice.
To the model.
And I'm back. It's showtime.
I'm content with where they left it. I think that naming the sequel Beetlejuice Beetlejuice was clever, and it makes sense for them to like leave it to do that and then have a third with the subsequent like 3-name title. But yeah, I don't know if there's like more story to tell, but that's not really up to us to decide. I think that's really up to Tim Burton and the other creators, right? But I do hope that if they do go forward with a third movie, that it's like it's done with a purpose, kind of like the sequel was. I wasn't like too enthused by the idea of the sequel until I saw the trailer, and the trailer looks so good that I was like, man, I hate that I'm sold on this because I didn't think we needed it, but it looks fantastic. So
yeah. I tend to agree. I hope that there's actually a purpose behind it if it comes. I think it'll ultimately be down to how the movie performs. I mean, if it knocks it out of the park, obviously the studio is going to want the money from a threequel.
The marketing is there.
Yeah.
Just in the name alone.
100%.
It would
built
be
in.
silly for them not to, assuming that this is successful.
Yeah, it's doing really well. It's grossed 162 million worldwide so far.
Very well deserved. And a really great campy start to spooky season. So I don't know. I feel like the timing for it was perfect, and I was so excited to chat with y'all about it on the show. Before we close out, any final thoughts?
I wouldn't want to not mention just by name Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, who were excellent in this original film. They really are the heart of the film, in addition to Lydia, and it's some of my favorite work from both of those actors as well. So it really, they're the young couple, and there's so much sort of time capsule about this, the way that young couples in the late 80s were able to own a house that big because everything was cheaper.
Yeah, we don't know what that's like.
No. Like, there are some dreams went to die after Beetlejuice came out, and remnants of a bygone era. But yeah, you like Adam and Barbara Maitland, and you like those actors in the role, and the movie also would not be the same without them.
I would just like to see Beetlejuice become more of a mainstream Halloween movie. I feel like you don't see it as much on television. I know we're in an age where you can stream anything you want, but it just seems like it's kind of left on the cutting room floor a bit.
Well, and to Pam's point earlier, the Beetlejuice Universal musical thing at like horror nights and stuff was pretty much all there was for like 25 years. But they did it. You could go to a Universal theme park and see Beetlejuice there. He was always like in the zeitgeist, or he took like a back seat commenting, and that just fits Beetlejuice's character in a unique way, where like all of a sudden he's back and he comes out and he does this big movie, but then for the next 30 years is just really, really quiet again.
Yeah. I don't want to give any spoilers, but he's off like taking part, not nefarious activities, but like distasteful ones. I mean, that's really the vibe you get of him. Is
he banana boating down in the Caribbean? Is that the best way to...
Maybe not. I mean, no. Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that he's not an upstanding member of society. So when he's not around, just because you're not seeing him and you're not seeing what he's doing does not mean that he's dormant.
And I would just say really quickly, because I don't think we brought it up very much, the Beetlejuice Broadway musical is so much fun. So if you're looking for like something else, you're like thirsty for more, and you get a chance to check that out, it's a really, really fun show. The musical numbers are super fantastic too. And just like the way that it's like, I think that the way that they portray it on stage is really clever, especially for the character of Beetlejuice too, who is basically the MC for the whole show, and it just like works so well with his,
that's clever.
Like the shtick, because he breaks the fourth wall in the movie anyway a few times, so he definitely is like speaking to the audience too, and a way that works for the show. But yeah, it's super fun. So check that out if it's in your show, like touring in your area. I don't even know. I don't think it's on Broadway anymore, but you could probably like just enjoy the soundtrack to the original Broadway cast recording. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I believe it is touring right now because it was in Atlanta in the spring and I missed it. I'm so disappointed by that.
Maybe next time.
Yeah. Well, all right. Beetlejuice is in theaters now. So be sure to let us know in the comments what you thought of the sequel, and if you think this franchise will ultimately become a trilogy. Don't forget to subscribe to What the Hype Podcast on YouTube and in your favorite podcast app, and head to whatthehypepodcast.com for links to our various social channels. We are sharing show highlights every week on social, and because we're a new show, your engagement across our channels really helps us out. Micah, Eric, Pam, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this episode for weeks now, and just so excited that we finally got a continuation of the story that has been such like a cornerstone of nostalgia from all of our childhoods. We will, I guess, say Beetlejuice to banish all of ourselves from the studio and to the model. We'll see you next time.
Home.
Thanks,
Home.
Home. There you go. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.